Good afternoon, Reading Room. We are back here on day 177 with Being Catholic Now. I love this book. I do. It is so good, isn't it? I know. I got all choked up over Cokie Roberts last time. I even remember, I haven't looked at the book since our 4 days off. And I remember, oh, and here we are with, did I tell you, Bill Maher? Did I know we were here with Bill Maher? One of my favorite people on the planet. But it's just another weirdo thing with Bill Maher. I don't know. He's just, whatever. Doesn't even matter. So, let's see. Yep, just making sure. Okay, day 177. We are here in the reading room. I am Dr. Annette Feravich. Thank you for joining me. Bill Maher, born January 20th, 1956. Oh, the same day as one day after my sister. Is an American comedian, actor, writer, and producer. He hosted the late night television talk show Politically Incorrect on Comedy Central and ABC, and is currently the star of Real Time with Bill Maher on HBO. And we know that that's not what he's doing anymore. It's Club Random, and oh, I forgot what his HBO show is. I'll think of it. He also hosted Amazon Fishbowl on Amazon.com. Maher has a substantial career as a stand-up comedian, including 8 HBO specials. Maybe that's the reason why I can't get my Amazon things. Maher has consistently been listed in the Catholic League's annual report on anti-Catholicism. He is often critical of organized religion and has described it as a neurological disorder. I was Catholic until about 13. I didn't go to Catholic school, but I went to catechism on Sunday. That's not really quite being Catholic, is it? We'd be dropped off, and then my father would join us for church. My mother was Jewish, and my father worked nights, so we didn't generally eat meals together. I don't remember us saying grace at the table. In 1951, my parents got married, and that was considered not cool by both their families. I really didn't sense that as a kid. When you're a kid, whatever is the routine you think is normal. That's how people get away with abusing children. Kids just think, ooh, that's what uncles and priests do. They touch me like that. I don't like it, but I never really questioned why my mother didn't participate or go to church. I'm gonna keep my commentary in my head. My father was a newsman. He was the real poster boy for the Irish Catholic liberal American. His father was a Union captain. They hated the Republicans. It was that very clannish Irish thing. My grandfather's sister voted Republican, and it used to drive my father crazy. He would say, Grace, you're living on Democratic coffers. You're living on the Union pension of Uncle Lou. And she would say, I don't care. I like Mr. Nixon. When I was 7, a nun told me I was going to go to hell because I was leaning on the pew in front of me. That was traumatic. I'll never forget those words because it seems so unreasonable. How could I reject them? That's another thing I hate about religion, that the proponents get to you when you're a defenseless child. I didn't have much contact with priests personally because the nuns were the ones who taught the catechism class. The nuns seemed mean. My father would always complain a lot about the priests, that their sermons weren't meaningful or that they spent too much time talking about how we had to fix the roof. He stopped going to church because he didn't agree at some point. He had a lot of guilt about it, so it wasn't the kind of thing he would have just announced. It was probably like, oh, we're not going this week. Dad doesn't feel well. Great. And the next week, we weren't going again. I certainly wasn't going to object. It was like if we weren't going, just shut up about it. And actually, that's how I felt very much. So I can relate to all of these writers one way or another. I don't relate to Bill Maher as much as I used to, but I do relate to what he's saying. That's how it was in my house, except my mother wasn't Jewish. She grew up in a Catholic orphanage. She could have been Jewish, who knows? But she grew up in a Catholic orphanage. I don't have any Catholic guilt. I feel bad that my father had it. For him, it meant feeling guilty that he wasn't living up to the standards of what he had been taught was a good Catholic, which is ironic because it's a religion that is largely founded on making people feel guilt. That has a lot in common with the Jews. I'm not one of those people who ever say, I have no regrets. I don't know who those people are. I don't know what planet they're living on, but they need a slap upside the head because you have regrets every day. It reminds me of that John Lennon quote when Love Story was out and the catchphrase was, love means never having to say you're sorry. And he said, are you kidding? Love means having to say you're sorry every 5 minutes. There's something every day I regret, even if it's small, but I handle that the way a modern person should. Ethically. Ethicists are, to me, much more moral than religious people generally. Religious people can be moral, but morality is something that religion only occasionally stumbles upon. I hate religion. It's the worst thing in the world. There's a giant groundswell for this opinion, but no one said it in public. Maybe that's my destiny. The more fundamentalist it is, the worse it is. Those people who fly planes into buildings because they think they're getting virgins in heaven are worse than Methodists who just go to church on Sunday. Religious moderates are enablers of religious fanatics. As long as legitimized, that's how it's said, to believe in nonsense, nonsense will have sway over people, and look at the mess we're in. I don't not believe in something, but I wouldn't say I believe in God. I learned the word apatheist from an ex-Mormon woman in Utah. She's a combination of apathy and atheist. Apatheist, as in she doesn't care if there's a God and it shouldn't affect how you lead your life. I would agree with that. So it's sort of a moot question. One will never have the answers. I've heard the Catholic League's not a big fan of mine. I won their award for being most critical of Catholics. No one insulted Catholics more than me, and no one effed kids more than the Catholic priest. I'll take insulting Catholics and they can have effing kids. How about that? Religion hurts people because it's so much death and destruction. It also diverts us. I think about what could be accomplished in this world if people wouldn't take the time and effort they put into doing something that leads to absolutely nothing, like praying, and do something positive and tangibly good with it. It warps people's thinking. I'm going to interject here. I think it warps people's thinking to think that prayer does nothing. That warps your thinking. Because clearly you wouldn't pray, so you wouldn't know. There's no reason why you have to believe in God to do social justice work. No, but your thinking is already perverted. This is the point I was going to get to. So you wouldn't even know whether or not you would be doing something positive and tangibly good with it. You wouldn't know. You don't have that kind of discernment. Angelina Jolie does a lot of good work too, and we don't have to hear about Jesus, but you don't know what her beliefs are. We know what yours are. I think there's something very evil about, well, you want the sandwich, kid? Well, switch gods first, then we'll talk food. I don't think that that's what Catholic priests do at all. I remember reading this and I disagreed with most of what Bill Maher had to say. Even if my background was similar, my resulting opinions were very different. Because, again, Catholic missionaries have never been about eat this sandwich, kid. No, they go out and they do hard missionary work, from what I've read. From not just priests, right? So it is about spreading the word, as it would be, but the word is about kindness and compassion from those missionaries. That is their word. It's a quid pro quo. I don't think necessarily they would hold back the sandwich before the kid agreed to believe in Jesus. I'm being comedic about it. But there is no doubt that the giving of aid and the inoculation of the new religion are put forth together. Take a look at the Bible. Don't kill. I'm a big fan of that. The more I got into the Bible, the less I found even that to be true. You'd be hard-pressed to find anything moral in a lot of stories like Sodom and Gomorrah. The Old Testament is nothing but God as a total psychopath. He's constantly killing and wiping out everybody, mostly for no damn good reason. That God is really awful. Somebody did a calculation and added up all the people he killed. It's in the millions. Whole towns, just genocide. Depending on whether he was feeling good about what the Jews were doing, he would wipe out their enemies or them. Religion is basically selfish. It's not mostly about helping people. Its primary focus is on your own salvation through Jesus Christ. For you, so that's not religion, that's Christian religion also. Let's get that right. You didn't get a lot right here, Bill. You said you read the Bible. I remember that was the plot of what I remember reading about Bill, was that he read the Bible, but nothing sunk in. We all remember the stories from catechism. For you to save your own ass after you die, you have to believe that this person was the Son of God, came down here on a suicide mission, and then flew bodily back up to heaven where he rejoined his Father, who's also him. Okay, I respect people as human beings. I don't wish them harm, but people who believe that can't have my intellectual respect. No one's asking for it. People who act like a simpleton on this topic don't get mine. I don't suppose you're asking for mine. I'm somewhat of a messenger. I do feel I have some destiny. Let's not get too religious with that, but maybe God is saying, Bill, please, somebody tell them that I'm not what I'm cracked up to be. I can't take the pressure anymore. Please debunk me. Thanks, Bill. You're our savior. The last great intellectual frontier is to debunk religion, and it hasn't been done. And again, there's two different things when you're talking about religion, or three different things. Christian religion and, for example, what many other people believe. Like, people from India, the other side, the flip side of Christianity, so people from the Middle East, right, who are sons and daughters of Islam, sons and daughters of Ishmael, right? And, Buddhism, all kinds of things that you're not having here, that you're not contemplating. So it doesn't seem to me that your whitewash of debunking religion, Bill Maher, has everything to do with Christianity and not a lot to do with much else. Maybe something to do with Jewish religion and the Torah, but again, if you go back through history, you'll be amazed at how many of the thinkers we all admire have quotes about religion that are more scathing than anything I could come up with, like Napoleon, Thomas Jefferson, and John Adams, just on and on. 150 years ago, they thought Christianity was ending because science was becoming preeminent and answering the questions that religion had always answered. I'd end the church if I were Pope. Why can't we solve Iraq? It's because there's two tribes there who have a dispute about who succeeded the Prophet Muhammad in the 7th century. That's why they're openly pulling each other out of each other's home and slashing each other's throats. That's just powerful stupid. Until the world gets over shit like that, we're never going to solve global warming, terrorism, or anything. That's true. Not in my lifetime do I see that going away, but I think we could make progress. I've been saying on television for 15 years, get people to stop treating religion as a subject that is out of bounds. It deserves derision. It keeps people from mocking it by making them feel that it's the one thing that can't be mocked when it's the one thing that should be mocked. I don't think mocked is the right word. No, it doesn't need to be mocked. Anyone's beliefs don't need to be mocked, especially when you're talking about, a giant majority of the population. 90% of people believe in some religious, spiritual belief, higher power. No, it should be critically viewed, and it has, by the way, Mr. Marr, who looks like Kip Sheparsky, who was always an atheist. No, I remember. No, I don't know that at all. I remember talking to him about what a Marr was. We have to tear that barrier down. I'm a crusader. I certainly have created enemies for a lot of reasons with lots of things that I've said, but this is one of the touchiest issues there is. This is the last frontier. It's the last taboo. And the next one, E.J. Dionne Jr. Did I show you the picture of Bill Maher? Because I don't even know if I've been showing you these pictures. Let me get that off of there. So there's Bill Maher a while ago. He has more hair now. This is Cokie Roberts. I think I did show you this in her Catholic school uniform. So you can go to day 176 and hear about Cokie Roberts and Bill O'Reilly, no longer at Fox. And then day 175, we read about Andrew Sullivan. I loved that one. Good looking dude. And Anna Quindlen. Who looks really familiar. So now we are going to read about E.J. Dionne Jr. E.J. Dionne, born April 23rd, 1952. He was born the same day my son was, April 23rd. Coming up, a senior fellow at Brookings Institution and university professor in the Foundations of Democracy and Culture at Georgetown University. He defines for readers the strength and weakness of competing political philosophies, and his analysis of American politics and trends of public sentiment is recognized as among the best in the business. He believes America is about to enter a new progressive era, a period of reform in government and renewed civic activism in our communities. Boy, were you wrong. No, it's conservatism, fascism, Nazism, and extremism. I'm sure it's thanks to my parents that I've always seen faith as enriching and challenging, not oppressive. My mother and father acted in a way that showed their faith was important to them and that it demanded that we all behave with generosity and decency. So despite all the problems in the church, despite my own doubts, I stayed and experienced the church as both nurturing and challenging. I was raised in Fall Rivers, Massachusetts, a factory town of about 100,000 people, 85% Catholic, though we lived in the only Jewish neighborhood in town. It's a blessing that my parents made that choice. They were strong believers, but also very open-minded about faith. My dad was a dentist with a working class in a working class town. His dad was a house painter whose business went under in the Depression. It was clear that many things in his life grew out of his faith. He organized all his fellow dentists to provide free care for poor kids. There were lots of kids in the town who wouldn't have seen a dentist otherwise. My guess is they agreed by getting data from those poor kids and studying them and experimentation. Truly, I had that Asian dentist, I'm sorry, who dug holes in my teeth. That's abuse. He was active in St. Vincent de Paul, and he was one of the 2 lay people who assisted the pastor in running our church. So it was all very much a part of our lives. When my mother wasn't taking care of us, she was a teacher and a librarian. She was a very serious Catholic. Read Merton. Thought a lot about religious questions. Who's Merton? I feel like I've read him. I feel like that's where we got our stuff from. I gotta look that up. Maybe it's Morton. Thought a lot about religious questions. She and our next door neighbor, who was an Orthodox Jew, would often compare notes over the meaning of God and faith. When my dad died in 1968, my mom went back and taught at our parish school. So instead of having that sense that some people have that religion is hypocritical and narrow, I looked at how it affected the way they lived their lives, and that was the attitude toward the faith that they passed on to me. I was taught by nuns in grade school. My first lesson in civil rights came from Sister Genevieve, who was kicked out of Louisiana because she organized a biracial First Holy Communion service in the 1950s. That's what I'm talking about. I do have to agree with Cokie Roberts in saying that when you were taught by nuns, you never believed for a second that you as a woman were a second-class citizen. That is true, ladies. She wasn't the stereotype that developed of the radical nun. She simply thought, this is a Christian church and you don't segregate at First Communion. Then I went to Portsmouth Priory. Most of the monks had pursued other work before they became monks. The headmaster was a physicist who worked on the A-bomb. Another teacher was an actor in New York, then had been an Episcopal priest, and then became a Catholic and taught us the Bible. These were really smart people who made it impossible for me to accept the flawed but popular notion that if you're a person of faith, there must be limits on your intellectual capacity or imagination. You are so right. I was immunized against many of the typical causes for rebellion against faith, both by my parents and these extraordinary nuns and monks. It wasn't that, it was for me, like nuns and monks. It was really, I don't know. It was a process, but it happened relatively quickly when so in fact, it was just a short process of short period of time of losing my faith. When I first started going to college, that was when I lost my faith. And that was what I was so afraid of. I had a fear like few other fears, like that made me cry. And I cried for months after I entered college because it was challenging my faith so much. But I came out stronger. And I know why it was so hard during that time. It was so hard because I was having trouble in my marriage, and it was the thing that I thought that God wanted the most from me, and it was the thing that was just the hardest to keep together. Woo! Woo! That will always hurt me the most. That will always hurt me the most. That will be the thing that will always hurt me the most. Always has, always will hurt me the most. I always joke that I also probably stayed a Catholic because I went to Harvard from 1969 to 1973, and it was more rebellious to stay in the church than to leave it. I thought leaving the church meant being a class traitor, given the working class roots of so many American Catholics. Right on, sister. It was a time, which is why the Catholic fanaticists, right-wing crazy people over here on the east side of Michigan just never rang true with me. Where were those working class roots, American Catholics? It was a time of real ferment. Students could pick from a number of masses. There was a high mass for traditionalists. I liked the chaplain who ran what you might call the left-wing mass, but I felt that it was a little separationist from the rest of the church. I didn't like the idea that we'd cast ourselves as enlightened left-wingers who felt that the folks back at the regular parish didn't see the world as clearly as we did. So I found the perfect mass for me, which was 5 o'clock low mass at the regular church. I found my way between the radical church and the conservative church. That would be the Saturday night mass. One should not overly psychoanalyze faith, but neither should one ignore personal influences. Clearly, because that gives us our unique path in my mind. Clearly, when I grew up, politics, faith, and loving the Red Sox were all taken for granted. They were part of your life, and they were, on the whole, a good part of your life, even if the Red Sox could disappoint you, especially back then. My parents were close to a lot of priests. They had very good friends in church, so it wasn't an alien culture. I'd always say my late mom was very pro-priest and anti-clerical at the same time. President Kennedy said that the bishops are Republicans and the nuns are Democrats. During the Kerry campaign, this group of nuns sent me a few buttons that portrayed the fires of hell in the middle, surrounded by the words Catholic Democrat, damned if you do, damned if you don't. I thought they changed the words. They didn't. It was my glasses. The nuns are great. The nuns in many ways were proto-feminists. They built their own community and their own sense of power. In principle, their position was subordinate. In practice, they were essential to the functioning of the church. The church hasn't been the same since the decline in the number of nuns. They were the underpaid labor that undertook important work. I became a liberal because I'm a Christian and a Catholic, but I grew up in a conservative family. From the time I was 12 or 13, I started rethinking things. My dad was very conservative, but also very open-minded. He was against the Vietnam War before I was. We inverted the usual family pattern. My dad trained me for the life I pursued because he encouraged argument. He gave me a subscription to the New Republic when I was 13. My mom was very interested in smart about politics too. The Christian message about poverty, social justice, war, and violence had the effect of making me rethink a lot of things. Whenever people say Christians are naturally conservative, there are some circumstances where that is true. But for me, it was quite the opposite. It struck me that to be a Christian had to involve thinking a lot about the poor, or, as the church has put it, about the preferential option for the poor. Yeah, exactly. When I was 15 or 16, Eugene McCarthy and Robert Kennedy had an enormous influence on the way I looked at the world. Kennedy's concerns about poverty, especially in the 1968 campaign, and the links he had with people like Cesar Chavez were elemental, almost pre-intellectual gut reactions to poor people and injustice. Reflecting on the violence in Vietnam, I flirted with Catholic pacifism. When I registered for the draft in 1970, I checked a little box saying I was a pacifist and actually wrote a long Catholic pacifist statement to send to my draft board. I'll never forget sitting in my uncle's basement after my dad had died and reading and rereading it. I thought to myself, I really like this, but I don't believe it. I wasn't a pacifist after all, so I withdrew my application for conscientious objection. Again, the moral and intellectual resources of the church, in this case its teachings on just war, were invaluable in trying to sort through such questions for me as well. The people in the anti-war movement I most admired were the pacifists, including religious pacifists, because they had fewer illusions. They didn't pretend that what was then the North Vietnamese government was a great government. They opposed communist political repression, but also worried that the American role in Vietnam was increasing the level of violence. There was an intellectual honesty to their witness. One of the reasons I could not bring myself to separate from the church and faith, despite doubts and difficulties, is because so much of what the church taught informed the conclusion I had reached. The reason why I left was because in times of need, I didn't feel my church was there. But that was the same thing when I went to the non-denominational as well. They absolutely were not there when my husband died. They were absolutely not there when I was being harassed and stalked. They absolutely were not there for me. And instead, what they were doing is encouraging a false narrative of me. So the church really is involved in some kinds of I don't know, incredulous things is the word that's coming to mind. When Abe Rosenthal came to Rome, I was covering the Vatican for the New York Times, and I helped him get a private audience with the Pope John Paul II. Now, the truth is that Abe could have gotten that anyway because he had been kicked out of Poland and won the Pulitzer Prize. I think the Pope was aware that Abe had been a gutsy critic of the Polish communist government, but Abe was happy that it all worked out. When we were walking across St. Peter's Square, I turned to Abe and said that I often told my friends in the Vatican that we have a lot in common because we worked for the only two institutions left in the world that claimed infallibility. Abe, bless him, didn't laugh. If I were Pope, I'd begin by convening people from the rich and poor countries, not just Catholics and not just religious people, to try and talk about morally committed people can do in a sinful world full of injustice. The idea would be to put the church in the center of an international conversation about what we can do about injustice and what role the church could play. What does Catholic social justice teaching look like in a world that is globalized where Marxism is largely dead? What is the peculiar role of Christianity and Catholicism in promoting justice, and what does that mean? That might be the first thing I would do. I wrote a column during the pedophile crisis that began, "Some of my best friends are priests." I wanted... That's the thing. That's the thing. Why I just can't even stand still reading about it. How could that be? How could it be? I wanted to talk about them and talk about their anger. I argued that the paradox was the church's self-protective instinct hurt a lot of good priests by delaying necessary action. It was very upsetting to watch. There were really good bishops in that period who understood the moral and personal stakes, and there were others who didn't, and it went on, and it went on. Cardinal McCarrick was on to this much earlier than most. If you look at the record, he caught up with this issue before most people did. I heard an interesting story about McCarrick. There was a committee looking into a particular priest. The committee consisted of all priests except for one layperson who was a parent. Everybody on the committee said, "This is a great guy. It can't be true." And the parent said, "Look, maybe it is not true, but I am a parent and I say you've got to pull the guy." So the story, as I was told, is that McCarrick looked at the group and said, "Once in a while it's good. We are not a democracy in the church. He is right. I'm going to pull the priest." It was a good example of a leader in the church fighting the instinct of self-protection and facing up to what the scandal meant. But there are too many unfounded scandals, and by now we should have discerned what was the correct scandal and what are the unfounded scandals. For Oakland University to say it was right to pull me from that position and they had every right to do so, they absolutely did. But to sit over here and harass me about a mental health examination like they've harassed me with an ongoing investigation when there's enough evidence to demonstrate and not enough resources to investigate the wrongdoings of all of this criminal injustice is the reason why we don't have an answer to this question still today. There is no excuse. People are purposefully being paid to look in the wrong direction. I have a theory that the Catholic Church's job is to make all of us feel guilty about something. Liberal Catholics should feel guilty and think hard about where they stand on abortion, family issues, and even stem cell research, which is a particularly hard one for me at least. Conservative Catholics should worry about whether the policies they support are actually consistent with the well-being of the poor. If the church makes us think twice and three times about lots of issues, I think it is doing its job. When it appears to become an agent of one party in the political debate, it is very troubling. I have to say, I don't think that Catholicism has been actively involved in political debate as described, and that's, I think, a plus, because it is chaos. It is a mess. This is Dr. Annette Feravich. We are here in the reading room where we are reading the fantastic book, Being Catholic Now by Kerry Kennedy. And the next chapter we're going to read is by Sister Joan Christister. Good grief. No, Chistister. OSB. What does that mean? There she is. There's Sister Joan. Can we call you Sister Joan? How's that? This is Dr. Annette Feravich. I will see you tomorrow. We are back on our 3 days on after our 4 days off. I hope on the 3 days on, I'm giving you something wonderful and juicy to talk about. This is the reading room, day 177 here in the classroom with Dr. Annette Feravich, giving you a healthier mind, body, and spirit. Thanks.